But we're talking about the macronutrients, the big part, which are fat, protein, and carbohydrates. 2/3 of the country is overweight. As we've said before, 2/3 of the country doesn't have a problem with eating too much and not exercising enough. 2/3 of the country has a hormone balance problem. And the reason 2/3 of the country has a hormone balance problem, is overweight and sicker and living shorter lifespans, statistically, that we're going to. So our children are predicted to live shorter lifespans than ours, is because we're eating these three things in the wrong ratio. Okay. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors ate lots of fat, very little carbohydrate, and were healthy and lean. Let me tell you a little bit about what these do. So fat, we use as fuel. It's our body's preferred source of fuel. Carbohydrates, we use as fuel. Our body uses it for fuel up to about 300 grams, and after that it just starts storing it as fat because it prefers to burn fat. Okay? Protein we use to repair our tissues because we're basically made up of proteins. Okay? So we've got two fuel sources that we can draw from. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors drew mostly from this fuel source. Okay? They ate lots of fat and very little carbohydrate, although they did, I don't want to discourage you from eating carbohydrates because I want you to eat lots of vegetables, okay? And fruits to some extent too. But like Art said in the video, the modern day fruits that we eat are bred to be sweet, they're bred to be sugary. A lot of times they're like Snickers bars that grow from trees. Okay? So we want to watch it on the fruit a little bit. But hunter-gatherer ancestors ate lots of fat, very little carb, and we're healthy and lean. We eat lots of carb, very little fat, and we're fat and we're sick. We're overweight. Okay? But eating fat is like the worst thing in the history of the world, right? We've been told that for the last 25 years. Well, that's wrong. I'm going to show you a little video that in 3 minutes kind of helps to dispel that. I'm having trouble getting this to go full screen.
If you could pack all of human history into 1 year, we've only been farming and eating grain since about yesterday, which is when we became shorter and fatter. We only started consuming processed vegetable oils about 10 minutes ago, which is when heart disease became our #1 killer. So after examining all this human history, the experts came to the obvious conclusion. We need to eat a lot more of these. And so they convinced us that human health depends on foods we didn't eat for more than 99% of our entire existence. How did this happen? In the 1950s, a biochemist named Ancel Keys published a study that compared heart disease and fat consumption in a half-dozen countries. The more fat, the more heart disease. The trend line was unmistakable. Just one little problem. Keys left out countries where people eat a lot of fat but have very little heart disease, like Holland and Norway. He also left out countries where people don't eat much fat but do have a lot of heart disease, like Chile. In fact, Keys had reliable data from 22 countries, and the results were all over the place. But you can't make a big splash in the scientific community with a trend line that looks like this. So Keys did what any dedicated researcher would do. He threw out the data that didn't fit and published his results. His punishment for this bit of scientific chicanery was to get his picture on the cover of Time magazine. Keys became known as the father of the lipid hypothesis, which says that eating saturated fat raises the cholesterol in your blood, and high cholesterol in your blood clogs your arteries and causes heart disease.
The hypothesis that when you eat high fat, that produces high cholesterol, and then cholesterol produces heart disease, is wrong in every one of those links.
This whole idea that dietary fat causes cholesterol problems is sort of a myth. The whole idea that cholesterol problems lead to heart disease is a myth.
The theory is completely and totally wrong. It was a theory that was made out of whole cloth and then pushed.
The term artery clogging saturated fat, it's as though it's all one word.
It's become part of the zeitgeist. Everybody knows saturated fat is bad for you, but when you get back and you start looking at the medical literature and you root back through to find out where this whole idea came from, it's bogus.
Does that make anybody else just a little bit angry?
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes me angry. I'm not trying to get you all worked up here, but so for the last, I guess, 35 years, I forget, I'm getting older, happened in the 70s. They thought that fat caused heart disease. Okay, so they said let's quit eating fat. Let's start eating one of these, because protein, you get a steak, you still get some fat with it. So let's start eating things that don't have any fat. Let's start eating a lot more grains. Problem is, heart disease didn't go down, diabetes, obesity went like that. Okay? Still the number 1 cause of death in the country, even though we're eating far less fat. Okay, so Gary Tobbs, who I quoted earlier, that did the 7 years of research on obesity, actually took 7 years and read all the studies really ever done, the significant studies ever done on heart disease and obesity. And he was meeting with a young doctor at the Centers for Disease Control. And the young doctor heard him lecture and came up to him and said, "You are killing people because there's literally thousands of studies that link heart disease with saturated fat." And Gary simply said, "The difference between you and me is that I've actually read the studies. There's not thousands, there are 7. And they don't link saturated fat with heart disease." The problem is, we think that because the last 35 years, not only of information you're getting, of information that's being taught to doctors, has told us that fat's bad, when that's just wrong. So I've switched my diet from eating very little fat, being overweight, to eating a fair amount of fat, and being much leaner and healthier and having more energy, and more stable energy, and more stable foods. Reason being, when our genes are fed like they're fed here, we burn fat preferably as fuel. So that if I eat breakfast, between breakfast and lunch, or breakfast and supper, or if I'm busy, my blood sugar doesn't dip, because when my body needs energy, it just dips into my own fat store. So instead of getting a 100-calorie snack back when I'm crashing and yelling at people, my body just takes a 100-calorie snack from my butt and thighs, right? It's really cool.
You living in our homes?
Okay, so this is the carbohydrate curve, which I think is really cool. I stole this blatantly from Marxist, and he's got a lot of great work on this. So this is the amount of carbohydrate we really should be eating in order to be healthy. Anybody ever heard, after you turn 30, you put on a pound of fat, lose a pound of muscle, no matter what you do? Well, it's simply not true at all. It is true, however, if you're eating in this range. Okay. If you're eating in this range, not true. Do you see that picture of Mark Sisson in Art Debating with his shirt off? I mean, it's crazy. And they're over 30. So the carbohydrate curve, if you want to, you might want to write this down, if you want to lose weight, you probably want to eat between 50 and 100 carbohydrates a day. Okay? And I don't want people counting calories, counting carbohydrates, like they're, I use this joke a lot, but like there's some socialite during award season, right? That's about, 50 and 100 is about a banana and a sweet potato a day, a good-sized banana and a good-sized sweet potato, and about as many vegetables as you can eat. Okay?
So is it 50 to 100? What's the measurement now? 50 to 100 what?
Carbohydrates.
So what? Grams.
Grams, I'm sorry, yeah, pounds. 50 pounds of carbohydrates.
That's a lot of leeway.
100 to 150 is to maintain it, or if you're really active. Athletes should be eating close to this 150 mark. Becky, when she's pregnant and breastfeeding and stuff, close to this 150 mark. Okay? From 150 up to 300 is insidious weight gain. That's where you gain weight kind of uncontrollably every year. You put on that pound of fat, lose that pound of muscle. Okay?
What if I've heard the term, I don't know if I'm saying like ketosis in the past? What about, how does that?
That's below 50 carbohydrates. You can probably not see in your notes, but that's ketosis.
Okay.
Below 50 carbohydrates. Yeah.
Okay, which
And
is
so-
not safe.
No, it's
It's
perfectly
not?
safe.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So, those macronutrients I showed you, there's protein, fat, and carbohydrates. There's actually a fourth one called ketones, but it's only produced by your body. It's your body's way of making sugar. So you could live your whole life without ever eating another gram of sugar because your body's got 3 or 4 ways of making it from fat and protein. Okay? So when you're in ketosis, it's actually a fairly healthy state, metabolically speaking. I don't recommend people are in there for a long time. But people get confused with metabolic acidosis, which is protein wasting, which people have in their cancer. So people are like, oh my gosh, don't be in ketosis, but it's a different thing completely.
Okay. So say it again, so the 50 to 100 grams represents a banana, a sweet potato,
And as many vegetables.
and as many, but it's the banana or the sweet potato?
No, both.
Oh, both,
Yeah.
okay, and then vegetables, okay.
any kind of, if you want